This is your friendly neighborhood author, Jonathan, and you are listening to Season 4 of the Floor Rejects podcast, The Wells House Phenomenon. Hi, it's your friendly neighborhood, traditionally unattractive, practicing witch, and desperately seeking Susan, author Jonathan, here with the Floor Rejects podcast, back with another chapter for the Wells House Phenomenon. If you're new here somehow at this point, if you're number 6 in my listener count, welcome. Each week we read a chapter of a story I'm writing or have written or am working on, and we analyze it. We analyze it for queer themes. We analyze it for queer arcs. We critique, and by we, I mean me, and anyone who wants to reach out to me on Twitter or email me at thefloorrejects@gmail.com or floorrejects on Twitter. We critique and kind of give some yays and some nays to the way that I'm writing, because someday I want to be a published author, not like that publishing deal that I was offered last year, but like somebody comes to me and says, we like your work, we want to publish you. Not because I'm like, oh, I'm going to get so rich, but mostly just like fulfilling a lifelong dream. So every week we break stuff down, we critique it. This week we're going to be covering chapter 14, but chapter 13 was a lot of wildness. So I'm looking down here. I've got my trusty dusty 2013 model iPad, and chapter 13 was a lot of exposition for what happens after Warren makes an initial discovery. He is kind of initially confronted in the real world with what Thomas, Lila, and Edward are, and then they kind of stomp him out. And chapter 13 is revisiting his slumber but real life, his kind of controlled life, in which he's doing a lot of searching for Thomas. He's wandering around kind of just confused by what's going on, but also just blindly following like kind of leading instructions that don't really mean anything. It's not a fluff chapter necessarily, but it isn't one that's particularly rife with like wild tales, wild things happening. But chapter 14 is definitely one of those chapters where we get a little more fun stuff. And you know what happened last week. If you don't know what happened in chapter 13 and this is your first time listening, I would recommend, whether you're watching the video version or the audio version. If you're watching the video version, there's a regular audio version that you can get anywhere you get your podcasts. If you're watching or you're listening to the audio version, there is a video version if you like reading stories or like reading along with stories, or you just want to see what I look like. Not to bum you out, but it's not great. It's just normal. You can check out any of those forms. I do have a website. It's jrlcreations.com, but mostly what I post there is just little tidbits when I'm feeling super manic or super depressed, or when I draw something I really like, or links to certain things. Still working on getting the Wells House, or We Just Call It Love, getting it published as a paperback. It's proving more challenging than I thought, but that's season 1. We're in season 4, baby. If you're watching this and you have watched previous episodes, yes, the background has changed again. Yes, my original microphone is back. You might have noticed in the last couple of chapters, the audio just sounded... It didn't sound particularly bad, but it didn't sound particularly good. And part of that is due to me kind of having to move somewhere where you can look at the background and not be disgusted, because I used to record in my closet with all my clothes wrapped around my head, and that was great for sound, but video-wise, it was just not it. So I'm kind of just finding a good balance here, because I figure if I reach out in as many ways as possible to try and make my dream come true, maybe someday it'll happen. If you want to help me with that, you certainly can in a bunch of different free ways. You can go to YouTube and subscribe, like, and comment on the videos. You can do the same thing in your podcasting app. You can leave reviews. You can leave some apps, I believe, let you leave like comments and stuff. I can't see them unless I go search for them, and I'm too scared to do that. So, without further ado, I think let's cut it off here. Let's get into chapter 14, and then we're going to analyze it afterwards. Okay? All right, bye. Chapter 14, Explanations. Warren, dear, dinner is ready. Lila's voice calls into the hollows of Warren's mind as he resurfaces. His memories dull and fade as the room comes into focus. There we go. Dinner is on the table. Edward should be back from searching the woods any minute, and with any luck, his brother will be in tow. Come along, she says, and Warren chooses to assume that she was simply compartmentalizing her worry. Warren stands sorely, following her through the dim halls of the dining room. The table was set, lit by several candlesticks dotted throughout the room. The house was quickly growing chilly between the open doorway and the lack of power, and Warren sat down eagerly, prepared to put warm food in his belly, strangely unworried about Thomas's absence. How did you put this together with no power? Warren asks as Lila sits down across from him, smiling as she served him heaping helpings of pot pie, steamed vegetables, and warm quiche. Warren, love, I haven't always had access to such amenities. I am well versed in the simpler forms of survival. Now, dig in. It's been a horrible day, and we deserve some hot food in our bellies to warm us during the night, she says, cutting into a generous serving of quiche and smiling. Warren follows suit, eating greedily as he feels the cool breeze drifting in from the front hall. He looks up as Edward walks through the door, his head hung low. Thomas? Warren asks quietly. Edward shakes his head, sinking into a chair next to Warren, silently scooping his own food, ripping into a hunk of bread angrily. Well, he will turn up. He's probably just holed up for the night, Lila says, her voice quiet and reserved. They eat in relative silence, Warren perturbed by the idea of Thomas lost out in the woods, confused or hurt. Warren always treated the woods out back as if they were small, easy to find his way out of when he would take a straight path in and out to the watering hole, but really it was a huge, unknown mass of woods. There was a good chance that Thomas had been swept out there or had run out there to escape the storm and was now unable to find his way back. Warren finished his meal quietly, scooping up his plates and glass, Edward's too. Lila smiles, following him into the kitchen. Warren, please don't worry. Thomas is a smart boy. I know he's fine. I can feel it, she says, and Warren doesn't argue. He doesn't feel the same urge to pursue it that he did when he fell asleep. He didn't know that it was mind control. He thought that he was simply reassured. When he plopped down in the living room, he felt a bit more of the chill from outside and was shivering quietly under a blanket when Edward sauntered in, his eyes less dark than they had been when he returned from his half of the search. Chilly, War? Edward asks, and Warren smiles, the pet name not unfamiliar. He nods, and Edward moves, squatting down in front of the mantel hidden in the darkness. Warren hears the scraping of metal and sees that behind an ornate brass grill was a fireplace. Warren had assumed it was defunct. Edward disappears out of the room, returning a few moments later with an armful of wood. It clatters down in the mouth of the fireplace, and Edward kneels down, striking a lighter and holding it under the logs, which catch quickly. He leans back, falling into a cross-legged position as the fire grows, a quiet crackling emanating from it. Warren can feel the heat, and he leans forward, letting the skin on his face grow warm and tight. Edward turns back to him, his broad, expressive face beckoning, and Warren moves next to him, throwing the blanket around the man's hulking shoulders. Not so bad when you have company, Edward says, his hot, bare skin warming Warren, who scoots even closer as the fire grows hot. Not bad at all, Warren says, grinning at the tiles at his feet. Edward scoops up Warren's face by his chin, and their lips meet gently, Edward's rough hand sliding up Warren's arms, up his neck to cup his cheek. They turn towards each other, Warren leaning back onto his arms, Edward leaning down on him, half straddling him as the air around them almost seemed to fill with electricity. Edward's full weight bears down on Warren, pinning him down on the warm tiles of the threshold in the fireplace. Edward, I thought we... Warren pushes up, starting to make excuses, but Edward pushes back, mashing Warren against the ground. Please, Warren, I'm so worried. Edward says in between small kisses on Warren's neck. Warren relents, sympathizing with a man in need of distraction. Edward grinds against him, sliding the smaller man across the floor with his weight. Warren giggles as his hair gets caught in a crack on the floor. "Edward, my hairs!" Warren coos, and Edward reaches behind him, gently releasing him and sliding his free hand under Warren's shirt, moving it up over his skin and peeling the shirt up, pulling it over Warren's head before he has a chance to discuss it. Warren starts to dispute it, but Edward's face, still so unfocused and sad, stops him. Then Edward has his shirt over his head, and Warren shuts up. The man's hulking, massive chest is heaving in the warm glow of the fire. "You're mine," Edward groans, leaning back down. The meeting of their chests, skin to skin, sends Warren spinning in ecstasy. The intimacy has short-circuited his mind. Edward's prickling, hair-covered chest slides against the smaller man, and Warren can feel himself losing control. He pulls hard at Edward's ass through his jeans, pulling him tighter against his crotch, grinding up against him, and Edward growls into his cheek, growing bolder, his hand slipping under the waistband of Warren's pants. Warren grabs his wrist, stilling him for a moment, but Edward whines, kicking and gaining traction, and Warren relents, letting go as the tough hand wraps around him, sending a shock up his spine. "Fuck," Warren moans, his back arching from the tile up to Edward, who scoops an arm under him, pulling him up off the ground and into his arms. Warren smiles as Edward kisses him hard, giving him quick, light strokes before letting go of his member. Warren, not as keen on pushing things further, simply smiles up at him, less drunk when the man lets him go. "Can't go too far. I'd rather savor this," Edward says, and Warren lets out a hard sigh. Edward does look absolutely delectable, his skin glistening, but he was right. He felt it was the right thing to keep up a slower pace, especially when Edward's brother was missing. Thomas gives a stupid curtsy and stumbles blindly through the black halls until he finds his bedroom door, and when he opens it, he finds it already lit by a small candelabra, and he tumbles into his bed, barely able to undress, his body so loose and relaxed from the heavy petting that his mind slows to a crawl within moments, and he is asleep. The knocking on his bedroom door is what wakes his mind, reforming like a surface of a lake after a storm. "Come in," he says, scrubbing his face as he leans up. The door creaks open and Edward slides in, acting secretive and smiling keenly at Warren. "Hey, Warren," Edward says, and when Warren looks over at him, he has to double-take. The man stands in his robe, letting it hang open. His clingy black briefs are pulled low by his thumbs. Warren knows how dangerous the man is, but as he draws closer, pulling his hands from his underwear and cupping Warren's face and kissing him gently, the stunned person on the bed would be remiss if he didn't savor the feeling of this hyper-attractive pseudo-man pawing at him. After a few moments, though, Warren regains his thoughts and pulls back. He smiles, doing his best to appear as hopelessly enthralled as his day self was. "Eddie, we just need a bit more time," Warren says, just as Edward lets his robe slip to the floor. He hikes a leg up onto the bed, crawling towards Warren, his eyes glowing as he got close enough to mount him, his bulging, hairy thighs pinning Warren into the bed on either side. He pushes Warren back into the headboard, kissing him again more intensely, his mouth warm and wet, prying at Warren's, who kisses back, doing his best to remain uninvested. But he was quickly losing that fight as his hands drifted, slipping under Edward, his hands clutching hard at the towering man's bulging glutes as he bounces and straddled over Warren, the fabric of his briefs scraping against Warren's growing erection. "Edward, please," Warren murmurs against Edward's ear. He was doing his best to remain steadfast. Edward pulls back, looking down and chuckling. Warren follows his gaze, letting out a small, shocked sound as he finds Edward's shocking, exorbitant dick pressed against his straining underwear, the tip pressed into Warren's belly. Edward rears back, smiling as a thin, viscous strand extends between them. Warren has to dig his fingernails into his palms to remind himself not to leap back onto the man across from him. Edward gives him another questioning look. "You sure? I really could use a bit of company," Edward asks, his hand sliding down his stomach, hair flaring up as it runs out from under his palms. Warren can feel himself slipping, tempted to let it happen just once, but he holds firm. "Thomas, he'll come back, you sweet, worried man, but I can't corrupt you just yet. Not until I'm sure," Warren says, pulling his blankets up for a modicum of modesty. Edward smiles, looking genuinely sad. "I know. I just find you so comforting," Edward says, and Warren returns his sad look, leaning forward and kissing him quickly to make sure neither of them fall back into it. Edward backs out of the room, bending over slowly to pick up his robe, looking back and winking as Warren stares unabashedly. It didn't hurt to look, he reasoned, if only to keep appearances. As soon as he is sure Edward is gone, Warren dresses in a rush, pulling the clothes he had been wearing back on and sneaking as quietly as he could to the front door. When he gets to the entrance, though, he finds that it was blocked, boarded up crudely with moonlight peeking through the boards haphazardly screwed into the frame. He curses underneath his breath. Edward must have done it after he left in the sitting room. Surely, during the day, it would appear unassuming, sensible to keep it boarded up until he could replace it, but it felt much more threatening in the night, in a blacked-out house with his mind intact, and Warren couldn't help but wonder if they were onto him. Edward hadn't indicated it, but surely, after the events of the morning, there had to be some level of suspicion. He dashes into the sitting room and tugs at the window frames, but finds them stuck. Then he tries the strange little room on the opposite side of the entrance that was filled with portraits, statues, and with no discernible function. Those windows were stuck too. He turns around, creeping through the pitch-black halls, walking blindly, running his hands slowly over walls to guide himself back down the hall, around a corner and down to the kitchen, where he knew his best chance was. He had seen the windows open a couple of times when Lila had to air out a particularly burnt entree. He stumbled blindly around the room, the light from outdoors not nearly as bright on this side of the house. He pulls on a window and finds it mercifully open. He slips out, falling clumsily into a bush. The house was built up on its foundation, and he misjudged the distance, spraining his ankle as he hit the ground. He limps, hissing, towards the barn. When he gets close, he pauses, listening for sounds that didn't belong to Thomas. He doesn't hear anything, and steps into the blackness of the barn. "Thomas! Thomas!" Warren whispers, looking around, getting down and crawling towards where he thought the trailer was, feeling out in front of him until he meets cool steel from the trailer's side. He crawls under it, sliding his hands under the lip of the hatch. When he pulls it open, no light comes out, only the smell of damp, cool earth. "You think I would stay there, Warren? I know I was a blonde, but I'm not that dumb," Warren hears from above him. He scoots out and looks up into the darkness. A flame flickers from nowhere, and Thomas appears, his swollen face stuck in a half-smile, the other half too puffy to move. Warren gets up and wraps Thomas in a hug that surprises both of them. Warren can feel the man sag in relief in his arms. Warren rubs his back for a moment, feeling the man's exhaustion and anguish. Eventually he leans back and tells Warren to follow him. Warren follows the flickering flame out the back of the barn down to the tree line. The flame continues, Thomas not making a sound, all the way out to the swimming hole. As the moonlight flashes across Thomas's body for the first time, Warren realizes that the man was still in nothing but his blood-stained skivvies. As they draw up on the edge of the hole, Warren sees Thomas wind around the side of a dense thicket of trees, and when he follows him around, he sees a small fire burning in a crude circle of rocks. "Had to make sure they couldn't find me. Couldn't start the fire until after dark," Thomas says, squatting over the fire, his hands cupped around his mouth. "Thomas, I don't know how long we have. Time doesn't work right here. I need to know what's happening. Can I help you? Can I trust you?" Warren asks, and Thomas rocks back, flopping sorely onto a log. Warren notices his pecs bounce, the ripple of motion through his tight thighs, but says nothing. I don't know where to start, or what to tell you. You might end up in more danger," Thomas says. Warren squats in front of him, pulling the flannel off of his shoulders and throwing it over Thomas's now shaking ones. "Tell me everything, Thomas. I've spent months here walking around like a zombie," Warren says. Thomas takes a deep breath. "You sure you're ready, Warren? You won't believe me," Thomas says. "Try me," Warren retorts, and Thomas looks deep into the fire, the flames leaping in his eyes. "We have many names, Warren. Trauco, Tintin, Boto, Mara, or more recently, Succubus. My mother, her name is Lilitu. My brother and I, well, we don't have nearly such strange names. Originally, when he was spawned, he was Eduardo. I was Tomas," Thomas says, looking up at Warren, who is chuckling, grinning into the flames. "I told you wouldn't believe me. Who would?" Thomas's voice is sadder, his head lowered to his chest. "Thomas, I believe you. I just can't believe it. You're a succubus? How am I supposed to react?" Warren crosses his arms as Thomas looks up at him. "Actually, Edward and I are incubuses. Same thing, just, more male-presenting," Thomas explains. Male presenting? Warren finds the wording suspicious. Yes, we aren't like you. Not exactly. In theory, we can switch because we can be succubi, or we can be more fluid, someone not on either end, really. We don't have a word for that. We generally just pick a form most suitable to us. Some of our kind work best alone and will switch whenever they need to, but Lilitu, she doesn't switch, refuses to. So she keeps at least one of her children around to do it for her. Thomas pauses. Why me? Or my family, I guess, Warren asks, and Thomas heaves a deep sigh. That is easier to explain. Succubi require certain components to reproduce. Reproduction is the ultimate goal, much like most species, I suppose. Your first male family member on this continent, he made a deal with Lilitu that his family, your family, would be well taken care of as long as she always had an access to a male heir of reproducing age. She didn't care how. Your family seemed to have treated it as a tradition to send the oldest male member to the manor. Her only stipulation was to have a place to conduct her business undisturbed, and when your ancestor agreed, he gave her the manor. Thomas leans back, a small yelp jumping out of him, his hands reaching to a spot on his side. Warren leans over, spotting a mottled purple and green mark radiating from his ribs. Thomas, you need a doctor, Warren says, and Thomas scoffs. Warren, haven't you realized? We can't leave. We are bound to this place until... Thomas trails off, rubbing at his side. Warren presses a hand to it, and the skin is burning up. Until what? Warren is caught on every word. So many gaps being filled in at once had him salivating for more. Until my mother bears a new heir, he finishes. So the component? Warren starts to piece it together. Yes, Lilitu requires a man's seed, much in the same way that a male form can impregnate. She can become pregnant. However, the task is complicated, difficult. It can take centuries to obtain a viable sample. Warren looks at Thomas in shock. Thomas, how old are you? Warren asks. Thomas looks up, thinking intently for a moment. Well, my mother is millennia old, older than history. I was birthed in Spain in 1662. Eduardo was spawned earlier, sometime in the late Middle Ages. Never bothered to ask. We've never gotten along, he says. Warren groans, looking up and realizing that the moon was no longer high in the sky. Okay, I don't know how much time we have left. We have to hurry. How do I stop this deal? Warren asks. Thomas tisks. You could just leave, break the rules, but your entire family would wither. With the contract broken, retroactively, all life spawned from the deal would die in time. You may be safe as the last male heir, but other than that, everyone from your bloodline would die. Your money would disappear. You would be left alone and penniless, Thomas says. Warren falls to his knees in shock. What happens if your mother gets what she wants? Warren asks. Thomas shivers. If it works, she abandons you, and the contract is complete, and you are free, he explains. But, Warren goads, but you would be the father of a bouncing baby demon, and that comes with a whole host of problems. And Lilitu would dispatch us to create bloodlines of our own, and she would move on to a new family, to a new man to destroy in his family for the next few generations, he tells Warren. The sun's beginning to crest a hill in the distance. Why were you here with Lilitu? Not Edward, Warren asks. First timer. After I was born, my mother had to raise me, show me the ropes. Turns out I'm a bit of a slow learner. Edward, on the other hand, just sired his third when mother called upon him. Thomas's voice quivers as the roaring starts. Warren can feel his mind beginning to split as the darkness hides the sun rushing towards them. Thomas, I need so much more. How will I find you? Warren asks, the roaring growing almost too loud to hear over. Thomas smiles up from the fire. You know where to look now, Thomas says, as the blackness of his consciousness swirls around the man and shuts the dream down. Okay, We are back. I have discovered that maybe this half blue, half red lighting is my friend. So, if you're just listening to this, nothing has changed other than my neighbors have stopped doing laundry. So, you might hear a little less background noise. However, I will warn you that today we are in a severe winter weather advisory and it's currently raining ice. I think you would consider that hailing if the little nuggets were big enough, but really it's just like really painful rain. So you might hear that in the background. But let's talk about chapter 14. We don't have to avoid spoilers anymore. Thomas has kind of cleared up any misgivings, any misunderstandings, any wrong interpretations. Although, can any interpretation really be wrong if it's subject to interpretation? Anyway, he's made it very clear that his family, his brother at least, and his mother that we know of, are incubuses and succubuses. He makes it very clear the difference between incubus and succubus, and I didn't find this anywhere in my research, so we're suspending disbelief, but I also added in that incubuses and succubuses can be non-binary. They can be whatever they want. They can shift and transform into whatever form is most comfortable for them or most suitable to their situation. That, I think, is as far as I can go in as far as speaking for someone. As far as creating a character and speaking through them, not really my place to go that much further. So that's all I can really do is present the representation and give it to a character that's not surface level, that's not a throwaway, that is a character that means something, and that transformation means something to them, or that manifestation means something to them, and that will come back into play later. I mean, I think you can kind of just assume that it will, but it makes sense that later on in the story, at some point, Thomas, Edward, Lila, we're just going to keep calling her Lila because my accents are bad and I should have thought about that, but what are you going to do? Eventually we've seen that they can transform into these like hellish creatures because they are hellish creatures, but we don't know what their true forms are. Whether they have a true form or not. But I think that's a fun kind of, it's not an outright representation in the same way that we can just full on just say Warren is a gay man or whatever. We've got these people, we're going to just call them people. I mean, I guess they're technically demons and making... It kind of gets hairy because we're seeing Thomas as kind of a protagonist, but we're also seeing two antagonists that technically also are kind of representative of the fluidness of gender or like physical representations of that. I don't know. Let's not look too deep into it because I'm not that smart. And I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. So let's just talk about the chapter. What have we learned this week? So this week we've learned flat out that Warren is dealing with a family, we're just going to say, of succubuses in the plural, or succubi. I don't think that's correct, but I'm going to say it anyway. We're dealing with a family of succubi. Lilitu, I actually did a lot of research, and by a lot, I mean as much as I could do without like bankrupting myself on books. Lilitu is the name of a character from Gilgamesh, which is a story that I loved, that I read in college, maybe in high school for the first time, I don't remember. No, probably in college, because the subject matter's a little tough for high schoolers, I guess. Whatever that means. It's a fantastic story. It's a hard story to read, but I remember really liking it when I read it. And Lilitu is actually the female demon, or basically the main lady demon in the story. Now, I don't think in that text there's any mention of demons being... we can't really call them non-binary because it's just kind of a physical change that they can switch whenever they want. But like a representation of gender non-conforming tendencies or gender non-conformity or gender fluidity. We don't see references of that in most texts other than demons have the ability to switch between. So they have the ability to switch between in most versions of succubi. I think there are some that I found that where it's kind of stuck one way or the other, but most demons can switch in between, from what I've read. We're going to treat them as if they're real for the purposes of this discussion. Also, when it comes to them, not only can they switch, but and here's a part that if you like, trigger warning, TW, like very light mentioning of sexual misconduct or assault or rape. A lot of demons tend to exhibit that sort of behavior. Mostly the male demons. Shocker. I chose to omit that. I don't know if I say it in this chapter, but if I don't say it in this chapter, Thomas is going to make it pretty clear pretty soon that the subject of the succubus's desire has to submit their seed or become pregnant willingly. That's kind of why the male heir has to show up and present themselves to Lila. It has to be willing in my version of the story, because in the real world, I think a lot of people would agree that succubuses probably don't exist. I don't want to say that they don't. They probably don't exist. So because they're not real, I can do whatever I want with them. And I'm going to make them super respectful of people's boundaries and of not assaulting people. I'm going to make that a thing. I don't think it's a problem. I mean, we've got vampires in Twilight who are like super chill and like don't want to hurt humans that they like. Have you watched iZombie? Hello. Like it's possible to take these sort of traditionally scary characters and just make them whatever you want, because they don't exist. There's no actual history for them. What I think is interesting is a lot of modern scholars have kind of taken incubuses and succubuses and attributed them more to sleep paralysis demons, which sleep paralysis is something that is like scientifically you can study, and a lot of people in the modern era have these sort of accounts. And a lot of people who do a lot of research in the history of incubuses, succubuses, ancient versions of demons that we have then co-opted as we have grown culturally, or as we have stolen cultures, whichever culture you belong to or whichever culture you are reading through or subscribing to. Like most scholars kind of agree, it's rooted in the idea of sleep paralysis, the idea that demons come to visit you in your sleep and stand over you. One, sleep paralysis demons are kind of like the physical, visual signifier of that sort of thing. Also, you have to remember that Christianity or religion more generally before Christianity, and then once Christianity came along, and subsequently as we like devolve into other religions or study other religions, the idea of sexual modesty or sexual control is another thing that is kind of an actual explanation for the existence of sleep paralysis demons. So like nocturnal emissions, we know what those are. We're not going to go with the funny wet dreams, masturbation, unclean thoughts, things like those. Sleep paralysis demons kind of are the excuse. Oh, a succubus made me do it. A succubus made me nut in my pants while I was sleeping. Why are you wearing pants while you're sleeping? Made me nut while I was sleeping. My bad. A succubus made me jerk off. I mean, I really, just as a side note, I think it's so fun to look back on like the Middle Ages, the Dark Ages. Think about like the solution for there's some STI that causes like inability to urinate for people with penises, and I can't remember what happens, but it creates scar tissue in the urethra, I believe, to the point where you can't urinate. And the solution to that was not to try and figure out the cause or to figure out like an actual medical solution. The literal solution to it was, and you can look this up, taking a Bible, because Bibles were usually the largest, heaviest, most well-bound books of the time. Taking a Bible and putting the penis on the table and then slamming the Bible down on it to break up that scar tissue. And it worked. Not the best solution, but, you know, Jesus saves us all. I just think those types of things are fun. And I think it relates back to our idea that demons or sleep paralysis demons or succubuses and incubuses, while they aren't directly a result maybe of religion, they've been co-opted by religion, and then religion is therefore seen as like the solution to them, um, when that's not really the case. Like, sleep paralysis is just something that happens to people. It sucks, not fun, not to be like one of those people who's like, yeah, I like experience sleep paralysis, but like, I have. It's not fun. I've had the traditional someone standing in the corner of your room looking at you and you cannot move, which is something that Thomas or Warren really kind of explores in the beginning of the story. He's laying in bed, he's stuck, and I did that on purpose so that we get that idea of sleep paralysis. He's laying in bed, he's stuck, he can see the figure at the end of the bed, but he can't move. But there's also like sleep paralysis. I've also experienced it where and this is funny, I woke up in my dream, or not in my dream, but like I woke up and I was laying next to my boyfriend and he was asleep, and I remember opening my eyes and my face was pushed into the pillow, so I was just kind of like looking out of one eye, and I was terrified. I knew there was someone standing right behind me. I could feel it. I knew that they were just getting closer and closer and they were going to get me, but I could only think in Spanish because I know Spanish and English. I couldn't think in English and I couldn't talk. I could only think in Spanish, and I was thinking so rapidly in Spanish, more rapidly than I could speak it. And I was so panicked. And that's like another way that sleep paralysis can manifest. It's just stress. And I feel like people in the Middle Ages and people before modern technology were probably more stressed than we are now. Just a gut feeling. What else do we learn in this chapter? I'll just level with you. You know, it has to be taken willingly. The semen, the seed, the semen, not the seed. Ugh, I had to throw in some funky words like that. But the semen has to be obtained willingly, as if it was siring from an incubus. It would have to be a willing impregnation. I don't know why I act like this. I chose this subject matter. Hold for plane. Is that my eyeball? Oh, it is. Oh, God. It's really coming down out there. This is going to be very bad. Oof. What was I saying? Anyway, has to be willing. So we've established that. We've also established that Lila doesn't really like to shift in between forms, which I thought was just an interesting kind of quirk to her, and also explains why Thomas was there from the beginning, because I didn't think everything out in advance. I think it's interesting that the other reason that he's with her is also because he's a first-timer, and I like calling him a first-timer when he was born in 1662, and that still makes him a first-timer. Again, you can kind of establish the idea, because they're not real, I can do whatever I want with them, as long as it still kind of generally aligns with the lore, the common sort of ideals behind incubuses and succubuses. That it takes hundreds of years for them to sire a new little demon, a new little baby. I think we know, like, if you want to avoid any spoilers for the rest of the story, I would just exit here. I appreciate you listening. I appreciate you watching. I appreciate you giving me your time. You know that I do. I'll see you later. Now, back to us. We know that Thomas is kind of going to emerge as this like antithesis to his brother. His brother during the day is this kind, caring, interested, bold but meek, because he knows that that's what Warren likes, kind of person. And Thomas is very, in the past he was kind of cold. We understand now that it's probably more that he's just uncomfortable with his role as someone who is taking advantage of an unknowing, unwilling, mentally controlled person. But we're seeing that Thomas is probably and is going to emerge as this sort of I guess protagonist. I hesitate to call him like a hero because he is a succubus, but I love iZombie. I love that Liv. Love her. I just realized her name is Liv Moore. Anyway. The main character in iZombie is a zombie, and her name is Olivia Moore, but everyone calls her Liv, so her name is Liv Moore. I hate it here. I hate it here. What now? Let's talk about what do I like about how I wrote this chapter. I like that it wasn't quite so repetitive. I mean, it is repetitive. I hate to out myself here, but while making out is one of the most beautiful and intimate experiences that I feel like you can experience with someone, it also becomes quite repetitive. Not that that's a bad thing. You're repeating things that you enjoy. But making out, pawing, heavy petting, fondling, grabbing at, all that, it gets kind of repetitive. So I think I did a pretty good job in switching up the language, not using the same word for the same thing too many times, not just saying grab, not just saying fondle, not just saying massage, need. It's very, you probably think it's easy, and it's probably very easy for some people, but it's hard for me specifically to, maybe it's because of the way my brain works that I can be like, mentally I can just use the same word over and over, but because I'm using the words to create a picture, it's fine. But if you don't think in words, you think in pictures, maybe it's different. It's it doesn't occur to me when I'm writing or reading something when I'm repeating the word too many times. It only occurs to me when I'm reading it through. Unfortunately, because I have a full-time job and like things that are going on, even though it's coronavirus times, technically I'm an essential worker. I don't really have time to sit down and read through something out loud a bunch of times. I do try and read through it at least once, but sometimes, like tonight, you're catching me reading it out loud for the very first time. And I'm just doing my best not to mess up because I hate making cuts. It's like a lot of annoying work for me. I know it's so hard for me. I'm like sitting here with my knockoff Hue bulbs and like recording and like posting this video and like feeding myself and paying my bills. And it's like really hard for me. I get it. I know. It's tough for me. Okay, my brain, she's broken. She does not work. Hello, I have mental illness. It's mental illness, isn't it, love? That's what it is for me. It is what it is. I mean, my brain told me it was a good idea to frame this so that you could see my air conditioner, and then I thought, let me hide it with some vintage board games. My brain doesn't work right, but I like that I was pretty good at not repeating the same things over and over. Some areas that I feel like I still have a lot of room for improvement is number one, the syntax around describing parts on a person's body sexually. When I tell you I have done exhaustive searching and looking up and cross-referencing, trying to find words that even remotely can describe the parts of the body that we are focusing on more. I always struggle with what's the right, like the not, like the least offensive term, like more masculine presenting bodies. Is that right? I think that's right. There's just not the same vocabulary around it as there is around people who may happen to possess breasts or a more feminine presenting body, I guess, I don't know. It's hard to describe it without being misogynistic or some sort of phobic. And I fully recognize that is like a problem that we have to deal with, and also like not the responsibility of anyone to feel bad about, but like me for not only perpetuating it by talking about it or perpetuating a system that allows it to exist. We've got to stop the injustice. We need more words for a man's pecs, for big, jiggling, juicy boobs. We just need it. It's something we need, as well as just a big, juicy meat. Like, when I'm talking to you, camera, and I'm sure at some point my employers will watch this and then fire me, which is, I mean, really at this point, fine. Hello, I'm using different colored lights to save energy because I can't afford my light bill. When you talk kind of candidly and not in like prose or in literature, you can say things like a big, juicy, meaty ass, and you can picture it in your mind, you can see it. But when you're reading something, it usually, unless you're reading it in a specific person's tone, it doesn't come across correctly to be like a big, juicy, meaty ass. In the same way that you can say a big, juicy, voluptuous, gorilla grip coochie. And because we're talking candidly, you know what that means. I don't want to say you can picture it, but you know what it means, and you don't find it odd or perturbing or generally disenchanting if you are already into like having those sorts of conversations and discussions. But when it comes to reading, to literature, to the words on the page, if it's first person, like I am telling you the story, I am writing it with the I noun pronoun. Oh God. If I'm using I, right? I, and the tone and the setting of the story and the use of the story is all I, and it's filled with personality, you can kind of get away with that sort of thing. Like, Drabble was written that way, where, there was a lot more personality for. What was his name? Don't remember his. Wait, David. There was a lot more personality from David, and he could kind of get away with using a little bit more slang. You can't really do that when you're writing something, one, because slang changes all the time, and two, because it just doesn't look right when you're reading something. It takes you out of that idea when you're reading in the third person, because narrators, a sarcastic narrator is kind of okay. A narrator with a specific sort of tone or disposition is generally okay, but like a super horny narrator is not generally something you want, even in like a romance novel. It's just not something that works. That falls much more into the vein of like fan fiction, but like the fan fiction that you read for very specific purposes and for no other purpose, right? I still do want to create like a cohesive, interesting story that doesn't solely focus around the 6 or 7 sexual pages in a book. Sorry, my mustache itches and my nose itches and everything itches. So that is something I do think I need to get a little bit better at, is maybe figuring out a way to like create my own sort of dialect that sounds like it works okay in an actual written formatting that you're looking at. Other things I need to work out, which is more like just sort of a technical thing. Narrating is not my strong suit. I do think I'm getting better. I'm not quite so scared or nervous to like put a little flavor, a little acting in there. You know what I mean? But I'm also still not to that like narrator level, like an audiobooks narrator where he's like doing different voices for the different characters, or like, to me the most nerve-wracking part is the idea of like, in my head, Edward's voice and even Thomas's voice are much deeper than my own. Usually my main characters kind of just their voice sounds like mine is, which I don't think is particularly high or particularly low. But the idea of like going into a much lower tone like this and sounding very deep and like down, to me sounds fucking ridiculous. It sounds so stupid when it comes out of my mouth. And I don't know what it sounds like to other people. I know what I sound like, and so the idea of talking like this, I feel like I look so stupid even doing it, even though it's just like a lower version of my voice. But also my intonation and the characteristics of just how I speak don't really work with a deeper, lower voice. See how scary it doesn't sound good. It sounds bad. And like the idea of like bringing my voice up higher for like a feminina voice, like I don't like that either. I don't like perpetuating the idea that women have to have like high voices and like that's how they like sound. Like the idea of just raising my voice up, you see, like not only does it perpetuate ugly kind of stereotypes because it's just how I've been trained, but also like just taking my voice up higher, like it already sounds just offensive, and that was only me just raising the pitch of my voice. And like the idea of lowering my voice, like the pitch of my voice, just to pretend to be a different character, also doesn't work, because people with low voices typically don't speak like this. Like they don't speak with like fucking vocal fry like I do. People where I come from have vocal fry, and like I've kind of gotten away from vocal fry, but in doing so, I still have those sort of inclinations. So it's like very hard for me to do a different voice and for it to not, to me, sound like I'm doing fucking Barney voice. So I either need to work on that or just like give up on the idea of doing different voices. And the only way that I can really change it right now and kind of signify even a shift between the narrator and a character in general is to change the cadence of my voice, and maybe not the pretty pronounced lisp that I have, or the general kind of flouncy nature in the way that I speak. Because when I get on this podcast, this is like not the queerest I can be, because I can think of several situations in which I am much queerer, but it's like the most honest form of me. So I don't really want to code switch and like turn my voice into like a straight person voice, because the idea of doing that is so dishonest to me. It only I understand why code switching exists, and I understand why it's necessary. It's dishonest to me when I'm trying to be honest with you. So those are some things I think I need to work on. But I think we covered a significant amount of distance in this chapter. I mean, we got a lot of answers, and we're only going to get more answers because we're fully in the second half of the story now. It's not, we got this kind of info dump all at once, and now we as the reader and me as the writer and Warren as the main protagonist can kind of heave a collective sigh of relief and say, okay, we are all on the same page now. Now, how do we get out? Like, Warren can say, how do I get out? We can say, how is Warren going to get out? I can say, how the hell am I going to get him out of there? I have the idea. I wish that there was like a way that I could share it with you and make sure that you would never accidentally hear it, like a Patreon but free. Does that make sense? Like, you have to sign up and then I can tell you how it ends, because I know how it ends. I also know that it does leave the possibility for a second story. But that's not important. I will tell you, originally the story was going to end up like, first of all, I didn't realize that Dybbuk boxes were made up, and I toyed around with the idea of using a Dybbuk box as like an idea. First of all, turns out they're made up, I think. And second of all, I think they're a made up part of like somebody's culture that's not mine. So like I don't really want to do that. Whereas like because the idea of succubuses and incubuses are based, or not based, but are assumed by modern scholars and readers to be manifestations of sleep paralysis demons and manifestations of like Christian and religious ideologies, I don't feel bad in taking those and using them for whatever I want. And also because I love the idea of referencing Gilgamesh as like a main inspiration for the story, or like a main jumping off point, because I really loved the story of Gilgamesh. I don't really remember why, but I remember I loved it. Maybe I should go back and read that. Imagine if I had a second episode every... We're not doing that, but if I had like a second episode every week where I like read to you from my favorite stories. I don't think I could do that because I'm sure there's like copyright issues with that, but it would be fun, I think. Can I do that? No, because that's stealing someone else's intellectual property. I guess it could be like a book club, but a queer book club already... Well, it wouldn't necessarily be queer. But there's like a podcast out there that exists that is like a queer book club, and I really wish that I could like reach out to them and be like, hey, have you ever thought about like maybe here's my story, one of my stories, and I wrote it and I like really like it, and maybe like you don't have to cover it, but if you can maybe like just like give me some feedback. It's not something I could ever do because I'm too much of a chicken shit. But I think that would be cool. It's not important. Let's not talk about my hopes and dreams, because I am currently looking outside and watching icicles droop down from my power lines, and I've been smoking cigarettes again because all of our vape stores shut down for the storm, so my throat is a little sore. I wish it was for other reasons, but I'm on a lot of medicine, so I can't be doing that right now. Anyway, I've been your friendly neighborhood philanthropist, chair breaker of chairs. You call me the breaker of chairs, maybe not mother of dragons, but breaker of chairs. Sorry, my neighbor, I guess, decided to make the most noise walking. Have you ever noticed that straight people walk silly? No offense, straights. But gay people, we don't walk like that. Ooh, we don't walk like that. Gay people, every gay person you know, whether their feet stick out one way, stick out the other way, or like mine, stick out straight when I walk, we don't walk heavy-footed. I did know a girl once who was bisexual, and that woman had the heaviest footsteps, but she also turned out to be the worst person I'd ever met. So, kind of makes sense. Maybe bisexual people walk heavy-footed. I don't know. Maybe it's because they're carrying so much trauma from like internalized biphobia within the queer community. Who knows? But I've been your friendly neighborhood muser, describer of things speaker, audio engineer, internet sensation. Let's put that out there. Maybe I'll put out there that I'll become an internet sensation. Maybe I'll put out there that a bunch of like young queer people find me and they're like, hey, we like what you're doing and here's what we're doing, and then we create like a queer collective. That would be cool. Somebody invited me into a queer collective once where we were like sharing our art and stuff, but it was mostly like one of my friend's boyfriends. He had like a Finsta Twitter, like a whatever that is, where he just like posted his nudes, which is like cute, and like if you want to call it art and like it's art, it's fine. Like it is art. Some nudes are like they are art, you know what I mean? But it was very much just like his whole and like that's cool. I loved it. I loved seeing it because it wasn't my boyfriend, but it's fun to see what someone else is getting, and he was getting it. But there was never any like continuation of it. There was never any organization. I wonder if I could start like a queer collective. Well, the only other artists I know are straight. I need to know more queer artists. If you know any queer artists out there, like queer artists that are alive right now, like let me know. Send me an email, tweet me. I want you to know I've been doing this podcast for over a year. My Twitter has exactly one follower, and I love her much. But I'd love if you tweet me something at the Floor Reject. Not even at the. It's just at. It's at Floor Rejects. I'll be over there. If you tweet me, I want you to know I will immediately see it and I will respond and I will show you so much love. Anyway, I'm gonna go because I gotta transfer these over and then edit them. So I'll see you next week. I'm gonna stop throwing deuces by next week, but I think, going to keep this lighting. If you're only listening to this and you want to see what I'm talking about, go watch the last episode and see how the lighting was, and then come in and look at the end of this episode. This is it. This is it, mama. Half blue, half red. Fuck blue lives. I think that's the ticket. Yeah, that's it. All right. See you next week. Bye, horse. I don't know where the remote is, and I just called you a whore. Okay, hold on. Okay, it's ready. Bye, whores, respectfully.